ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
For so long, this has been a case that has captured the attention of the world. People have had questions for so long. Today, we got some of those answers, but there's still a very, very long way to go in the trial of Erin Patterson. Hello, I'm the ABC's court reporter, Kristian Silver.
And I'm Stephen Stockwell, and you are listening to Mushroom Case Daily, a podcast that is covering the trial of Erin Patterson. And today, that has officially started. We have got so much to go through. There's been a huge amount of news that has come out of this, and I hope you're ready for an absolute bumper episode.
The small-town mystery that's gripped the nation and made headlines around the world. Just a week after 4 people sat down for a family lunch in rural Victoria, 3 of them were dead.
On the menu was beef wellington, a pastry filled with beef and a pate made of mushrooms.
3 people are dead and 1 man is fighting for his life this morning after a suspected mushroom poisoning in South Gippsland in Victoria.
But Erin Patterson has strongly maintained her innocence.
It's a tragedy what's happened. I love them.
You're listening to Mushroom Case Daily. Kristian, to get us into today's episode, can you give us a quick recap of what's unfolded?
It's impossible to sum this up quickly, but I'll try my best, Stocky. Today, we learned fresh details about this lunch at the centre of this case, why the lunch was organised, what happened with the meal. We also learned graphic details about how those lunch guests suffered in the aftermath from the illnesses that they got from eating this beef Wellington, which had death cap mushrooms in it. Then we learned about Erin Patterson's actions in the aftermath. Then we got into some of the analysis that the prosecution and its experts have done, which has led them to reach their conclusion and their argument that she is guilty of charges of murder and attempted murder. Finally, Erin Patterson's barrister, Colin Mandy, took to the stand to provide a brief defence on behalf of his client.
You've summed up what was a huge day in an incredibly short period of time. We're not going to leave you with just that. We're going to give you a really detailed explanation of how all of this unfolded. But I was following along with bits of this, Kristian. I was in the media overflow room for parts of it. I was listening from the studio here for other parts. It was so compelling. And I want to start this podcast with a conversation about the lunch because we got so much detail that we had not heard before. And I want to start with finding out why that lunch took place. Can you tell us why it was arranged, what the purpose behind it was?
Certainly, Stocky. I think it's good to just zoom out a little bit and just refresh people about who the characters are in this story. So obviously Erin Patterson is the central figure of this trial. She has an estranged husband, Simon Patterson. Mr. Patterson's parents, Don and Gail, also live nearby to Erin in a regional community in Gippsland in Victoria. Now, the Pattersons also have some other relatives, the Wilkinsons, Heather and Ian, so remember them as well. So all of these people live in the communities of Leongatha and Korumburra, all fairly close to each other.
Yeah, Korumburra is like a 15, 20-minute drive from Leongatha, right?
That's correct. That's right. So to sum it up, the prosecution says that Erin Patterson organised a lunch at her house and she invited those 5 people I've just mentioned. And she'd hinted to them that it was to discuss some medical issues that were serious. Simon Patterson, the estranged husband, turned down the invitation. He said he was too uncomfortable to come.
Right.
The other 4 did go along, and I guess what happened next is at the centre of this entire case.
Yeah, and I mean, Simon not going to this lunch, was that something that was discussed, a week or 2 out? When did Erin find out that he wasn't going to be there?
Simon sent her a text the night before saying that he wasn't interested to come along. The prosecution says she expressed some disappointment with that, but ultimately pressed ahead with her plans. Apparently, she had said that she was quite disappointed given the level of effort she'd gone into to preparing the lunch for the day.
And the lunch in question is the beef Wellington with, allegedly death cap mushrooms in it that we've been talking about for a very long time. It is the
Not allegedly anymore.
Right. Okay. Yeah, of course. Right.
We can say it.
We can say it. And obviously, beef Wellington's quite a complicated meal to make. So it would explain why Erin might be a bit frustrated that Simon would be coming to that lunch. What do we know about that meal and how it was prepared and served?
So the way that the prosecutor, Nanette Rogers, tells the story, I'll try to paint a bit of a picture. The guests rock up to this lunch on the 29th of July 2023 at Erin's house. And they're given a bit of a house tour and she shows them around, and eventually they all start milling around the kitchen island bench, as many people do when they meet for a gathering. And Erin, according to the prosecution, then serves each of the guests individual beef Wellingtons.
So not one beef Wellington, not like a large log. We're talking small little, like, I guess, chicken Kiev size.
Pasties? Is that what you call them?
Yeah.
Pasties?
Yeah, so like a small parcel. Okay, right. Okay, that's okay.
So according to the prosecution, Erin starts plating these up. The beef Wellingtons go on 4 grey plates, but there's 5 guests, remember? So Erin's plate, according to the prosecution, is the orange plate. So anyway, there's some other things on the side, some beans, some mashed potatoes, and everybody sits down to eat this meal. According to the prosecution, they say grace. This is a family with strong religious ties. Ian Wilkinson's actually a pastor at the local church. They eat the meals. Apparently there's even some banter about how much some people ate and how much other people didn't eat. And then Erin Patterson drops a bombshell. She tells the guests that she's got cancer, and the reason why she's invited them over is to seek advice about how to break this news to her kids. And she just doesn't know what to do.
This is obviously slightly aside from, the case, but what was the advice from the guests around that?
Nanette Rogers, the prosecutor, said that the guests were of the view that she should be upfront, and they prayed again for her to find the wisdom to do the right thing. And it sort of sounded like that was the end of that particular topic. Yeah. Eventually, the guests went home for the evening and everything changed after that.
Yeah, so we know that they all got incredibly sick after this meal. How soon did they start to feel sick? When did they start to experience the symptoms associated with death cap mushroom poisoning?
By the following morning, all 4 of those guests were starting to feel really sick. Initially, to them, it seemed like food poisoning, diarrhea, vomiting, but this started getting really, really bad. So the Patterson parents decided to go to hospital. They also called their son Simon to let him know that they were quite sick. Simon then contacted the Wilkinsons. Turns out they were also very sick too, and Simon drove them to the hospital. Now, there was some interesting comments that the prosecution said occurred made by Heather Wilkinson, where Heather apparently was questioning this plate arrangement. She was wondering why we all ate off one set of plates and Erin ate off the other, and Heather was said to have been a little bit confused by that arrangement.
Yeah, because there was the grey plates and the orange plates that the Wellingtons were served on, Erin eating off of the orange plate. What happened once the diners went to hospital?
Long story short, they ended up at the local hospitals and their conditions started to get really, really bad and deteriorating. These sorts of symptoms of diarrhea and vomiting becoming incredibly serious.
Yeah. Did Erin get sick?
Erin said that she did get sick, and this is going to be one of the points of dispute in the trial, and we'll have more to say about this. But I think what's abundantly clear, and no one will dispute, Erin did not get sick to the level that the lunch guests did. Now, the prosecution claims that Erin Patterson did not eat the same beef Wellington recipe as the other lunch guests. They are saying that her beef Wellington did not contain death cap mushrooms, and that's why she didn't fall sick in the same way that they did.
Did Erin present to hospital? Did she go in there and talk to anyone and, raise concerns about how she was feeling?
Erin Patterson did end up in the local hospitals. So this lunch happened on a Saturday.
Yep.
The lunch guests fell quite sick and were in the hospital by the Sunday. Erin Patterson only first came to hospital on the Monday, so an extra 24 hours, and she was complaining of having symptoms when the doctors realised that she was connected to these other four who were by this point getting even worse. These doctors began to really worry for Erin Patterson's safety. And the prosecution said she was told by a doctor, look, you've potentially been exposed to a lethal dose of what they believed was death cap mushrooms at that point.
Was she worried?
Well, according to the prosecution, seemingly not as worried as she should have been. Nanette Rogers was saying that Erin Patterson was very reluctant to check herself into hospital to stay there. And then when Miss Patterson allegedly told the hospital staff that her kids had also eaten leftovers of the mushroom meal, that raised even more concerns for the hospital staff that these children have also potentially been poisoned. But Erin insisted to them, no, I scraped the mushrooms off the plate. They didn't consume any mushrooms. They're fine. There's nothing to worry about here. And there was a lot of arguments between Miss Patterson and the hospital staff about that issue.
Did the kids end up getting checked out?
They did eventually. And according to the prosecution, they were found to be healthy and fine. So the implication being they didn't eat the beef Wellington with death cap mushrooms or have any portion of that meal.
Did they end up getting any of the leftovers to test and check to see if that's what it was?
They did, and this is one of the things that we were able to see by being in the courtroom. They flashed up on a screen some of the leftover beef Wellington that the police were able to retrieve from a bin. Look, this is food that's about 4 days old that's been recovered from a bin. So when I say it was a stale-looking pastry with some brown filling inside, take that with that context. It wasn't too pretty to see what had been fished out of that bin, but the jury did see a picture of the leftovers.
Wow. And so they're now, they've now shown us that it was death cap mushrooms in this beef Wellington. Do we know where they came from?
That's a really good question. And according to the prosecution, Miss Patterson gave varying accounts of where these mushrooms came from. The story seemed to change. I think we'll have to step through it.
Yeah. So what do you mean it changed? What was the first time, when she was questioned about this the first time, what was presented?
So there were two sources of mushrooms offered up as the initial explanation, some from Woolworths and some from an unnamed Asian grocer in Oakley, which is a suburb in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
But Miss Patterson wasn't able to say which Asian grocer it was. Initially, she denied using any mushrooms that had been picked from the wild. Now, during the subsequent investigation, lots of people asked Erin Patterson where the mushrooms came from, and the prosecution say the story chopped and changed. So initially it was Oakley, then the suburb changed to others in the area. Still, she couldn't really remember. Local council officers started going around to all the shops trying to figure it out, but still the shop was never really identified. She said she got some of the mushrooms from a local Woolworths in Leongatha as well.
Right. What kind of emerged after that?
Well, during the investigation, obviously a suggestion that a retail shop is selling deadly mushrooms is absolutely shocking, and understandably the health authorities conducted a very serious investigation to this, and ultimately the prosecution say this investigation showed that there were no such death cap mushrooms being sold by Asian grocers or by Woolworths, and in their view this was a lie that Patterson was telling.
Where could these mushrooms have come from then?
The prosecution has made some suggestions that they might have come from either a place called Lock or a place called Outram. These are locations nearby to where Erin Patterson lives. The reason they've pointed out these spots is that there is a website called iNaturalist, which is a place where science enthusiasts go and document various things. And on that website, people have posted confirmed sightings of death cap mushrooms. Prosecutors say Miss Patterson went to these areas shortly after these posts went up. Strong implication being she went there to pick the mushrooms.
Oh, right. Okay, so we now know, the story or what the prosecution is presenting around where these mushrooms have come from. I mean, what about the cancer diagnosis, though?
Her barrister today admitted it was fake.
That she had lied about having cancer to her, basically extended family.
That's correct. And the prosecution added further weight to that. They said that there had been no records that Miss Patterson had ever been found to have had cancer. There's a cancer registry. Her name wasn't on that. And there were further medical records which showed that while she had gone in for some testing, she had been told that she did not have cancer.
Wow. You've been in the room all day. You've been sitting there in the room with Erin and with the jury as all this is going on. How did she look? What was the mood?
There was definitely a tense atmosphere in the room, understandably, on the opening day of a trial like this. So it did go all day. It wasn't over in a couple of hours. For most of the day, Erin Patterson was in the dock looking pretty composed, obviously taking everything very seriously and listening closely. When it came time for her defence barrister, Colin Mandy, to provide a response, I think she showed a little bit of emotion. I could see that at one point she appeared to be fighting back tears when Mr. Mandy conceded that there were certain things that she had done.
And speaking of Erin Patterson's defence, after we heard from the prosecution, there is an opportunity for the defence to make their opening statements. What did we hear from them?
The defence response is never as long as the prosecution's opening. So Nanette Rogers, I didn't add it up, but it must have gone for about 3 hours. Colin Mandy's response was about 20 minutes. The reason for that is that technically these opening addresses are not the evidence. So the prosecution has the onus of proof. So Nanette Rogers laid out an overview of the evidence to come. And once that evidence is presented, that's when Colin Mandy and his team can properly attack that evidence. So he said, I'm going to run through some things that are in dispute and not in dispute. Mm-hmm. But the bigger, but the more fulsome response from the defence will come later.
What did we hear about the motive for these crimes?
Not a whole lot. And I think that's interesting. Everybody wants to know not just the how, but the why when it comes to anything like this. The thing with a charge of murder is you don't have to prove a motive. So prosecutor Nanette Rogers said there wasn't a specific motive that they could point to. However, she said the 4 elements of murder can be proved beyond reasonable doubt. I can run you through what those 4 elements are.
Yeah, go for it.
The jury was given this checklist, and these are the things that they have to be satisfied of to find Erin Patterson guilty. They have to be satisfied that she caused the deaths by serving a poisoned meal. That seems to not be in dispute. That's agreed. That did happen. This is the next one that's in dispute, though, that her actions were conscious, voluntary and deliberate. Prosecutors say she did act deliberately because she picked death cap mushrooms and served them to her relatives. The defence says no, it wasn't a deliberate action at all. The third point is also in dispute, that at the time of the alleged conduct that Erin Patterson intended to kill or cause really serious injury. Prosecutors obviously say that's the case. The defence totally disagree. The fourth point that the jury must be satisfied with is essentially that Erin Patterson wasn't acting in self-defence. You've got to have all of those elements ticked before you can find someone guilty of murder.
Okay, so it's reasonably prescriptive. I mean, How did the defence kind of wrap up their day?
Mr. Mandy asked the jury a pretty simple question, and he said, did she intend to kill these 4 people? And he said, the defence case is what happened was a tragedy and a terrible accident. And he said, she's innocent. And he went on to then explain some of Miss Patterson's conduct in the aftermath, some of the lies to police. And another thing that she did, which was to dump a mushroom dehydrator that had been used in the preparation of the meal. She actually dumped it at the tip, and the cops found it later on. So Mr. Mandy said that Erin Patterson panicked given what had happened, the shocking consequences of the lunch had sent her into a mode where she did things that weren't rational. Mm-hmm. And he said that at the end of the day, Miss Patterson is innocent until proven guilty. And he said to the jury that innocent until proven guilty is not just a phrase that people say, it's a fundamental principle that protects all of us. And he says that prosecution allegations are easy to make, but what really matters is proving them. And I guess at the end of the trial, we'll get the ultimate answer as to whether the prosecution can prove it.
Kristian, thank you so much for taking us through all of that detail. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to this podcast, who's been getting in touch, sending us emails, mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. We will get to a whole bunch of them over the next little while, obviously on days that are very busy like this one. It is hard to fit them in. I do want to come back to Joanne's question from yesterday.
Yes.
Who asked, what did they have for dessert after the lunch? You were talking about maybe that's something we will hear in the opening statements. Did we get any detail on that?
We actually did, Stocky, and Nanette Rogers, the prosecutor, said that for dessert the group ate a cake that had been brought by Gail Patterson, and there was also a fruit platter that had been brought by Heather Wilkinson. Interesting.
Well, there we go, Joanne. Hopefully that has answered your question. If you have a question, get in touch, mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. We very much appreciate you listening to this podcast, getting us to number 1 on the podcast charts. It's a very nice feeling and something very nice to see as we're going into the opening statements today. Please tell your friends and family about Mushroom Case Daily. If you're enjoying this, share it in the group chat.
Thank you so much for your support. It means a great deal. And this is only the start of this trial. There's a very, very long way to go. Opening statements were done today. Tomorrow, we get into the evidence.
That's right. And we can keep you up to speed with everything that's happening in that case if you jump on the ABC Listen app and follow Mushroom Case Daily.
Mushroom Case Daily is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, the ABC's court reporter Kristian Silva, and producer Stephen Stockwell.
Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, and props to Kristian's boss, Sarah Jench, and Audio Studios manager, Eric George. Also thanks to our true crime colleagues, Tim Roxburgh and Yasmin Parry. This episode was produced on the land of the Gunai-Kurnai people.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.